Welcome, everyone, to the L7C podcast, NBA edition. Today, we are going to be recapping the NBA Finals. We're going to be talking about the Olympic basketball going on right now and give a little draft preview as the draft is this Thursday. So, when we talk some basketball, we got to have our basketball expert, Mr. Evan Debo. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing good. I'm well rested after a week off last week on vacation and back ready to dive into the draft this week. And what a win by the Milwaukee Bucks to watch on vacation, and that 50 piece by Giannis. I know I was rooting for the Bucks in the series. No ill will against the Suns, but I'm doing well. What a finals, what a run, and excited for things to keep moving with free agency upcoming too and the draft on Thursday.
Yeah, and with the Bucks, man, I got to give you your props. You did say Bucks in 6 on our NBA Finals preview, so kudos to you, man, calling it exactly how it went down.
Bucks in 6. The Brandon Jennings prophecy comes true. That was kind of I'll be honest, it's kind of somewhat of a joke, like in the first part, like an optimistic joke. Because I wanted to see the Bucks when I wanted to see Giannis get a ring to him. But and then to just how the series unfolded. There's just so many talking points, Martin. Suns go up 2-0 in the series, and as always is the case, I hate when people make fun of it because it's so true. Like a series doesn't start until the opposing team wins on the other team's home court, and like that was true. So we had that 2-0 start by the Suns where they just looked amazing. Ayton was eating, Bridges, you name it, Cam Johnson, all the role players were doing role player like things at home, like how they're supposed to be. And then the series shifted to Milwaukee, you had 4 straight wins by the Bucks. Each game had its own kind of theme to it. I'd love to dive in a little bit, but let's kind of work backwards.
Okay.
And go that route, I think. So your most valuable player in the series, hands down, was one Giannis Antetokounmpo. 35.2 points per game, 13.2 rebounds per game, 5 assists per game. 61.8% field goal percentage, which is like better than a lot of centers just catching lobs. And this guy's putting it in from all over, just could not be stopped with those go-go gadget arms attacking the basket. He overcame the wall, or, there's a lot of discussion of, when teams wall up on the Westbrooks and the Siakams and all those guys that we've talked about over the years, right? Where they wall up and, they force you to make a decision on the basket, that he worked a lot of off ball where he caught it one motion, he's already there. They have no time to get that set up. He circumnavigated that without really having to have a jump shot. Just absolutely amazing. And then he had 2 phenomenal free throw shooting games in the 6 games. If you go back, so that in the game 6 win, and that's just greatness. That absolutely is great. Is when you have a guy like that, it also says that, hey, this guy can overcome his free throw shooting woes at the line, where we know how bad a free throw shooter he is. But in that game 6 finale, 50 points, 14 boards, 5 blocks, 17 of 19 from the line. Did you ever think you would see a Giannis game, especially this quick, with how bad the 10-second counts were, how bad he is a free throw shooter, that we'd see 17 of 19 from the line? And then if we back up to that pivotal game 3, you have to win that game because you're down 2-0. The Suns win that game at home. He was 13 of 17 from the line, dropped 41, 13, and 6. Did you see him overcoming these free throw hurdle? That was a large chunk of how they're able to win those 2 pivotal games. The game 3 to get the first one at home, set the tone, and then the game 6 closer. Did you see that coming?
No, I didn't, because I know throughout all of our previewing the playoffs, my biggest thing that I've always said about is Giannis in his free throw shooting. And I always felt like that would be something that would hold him back, because I know we're tired of age-old things. But when you do get in the playoffs, things do slow down. And you're going to have to be scratching and clawing for those points, and you're going to have to make free throws. And every time they were up against someone, I was like, Giannis's free throw shooting is going to be the key. And I could not have seen those 2 games that he had in game 3 and game 6 of him making those free throws. It was just unbelievable. It was greatness.
Again, it's just so impressive how he was able to. I mean, again, that's just it's just amazing how he was able to just overcome what they were throwing at him. And obviously, I think it hurt size-wise, that Phoenix did not have the front court size to contend with him. I mean, who can contend with Giannis? But, I think that a lot of people were interested to see the Ayton and Lopez thing, get figured out. And, I mean, Milwaukee figured out early on in the series with those first 2 losses that, hey, we just can't play Brook Lopez right now. And while that kind of faded, Ayton had 14.7 and 12 on the series. But I mean, by and large part, he was not that effective outside the first 2 games whatsoever. Had some foul trouble in there in one of those games. But I mean, again, each game kind of had its own theme to it. I mean, it was a huge game 5 on the road to pick that up in Phoenix. I mean, where you came home and Bucks and 6 was a reality. Going back to game 4, the 40 points by Chris Middleton. I mean, that was impressive just in terms of total points and what he was able to do. And Giannis, I think, had 25 or 26 maybe in that game.
And in game 4, he had one of the greatest defensive plays in finals history.
Yeah. I mean, and just Chris Middleton's, what's not going to stand out. I mean, Middleton on the series averaged 24, 6 and 5, but what's not going to stand out in like the box score and stuff necessarily, unless you're looking at the advanced metrics, is that dude's clutch shooting. I mean, you would talk about final 2 minutes, final 5 minutes, what have you. I mean, he was lethal, man. He was like, I mean, it was, you can't throw around the MJ-esque type thing with but I mean, it was scary. Like there was no answer, hand in his face that just flip around real quick, kind of 180 no scope. I mean, it was in like money, or just the one dribble 3-point pop when they needed it down the stretch. I mean, Chris Middleton, I mean, he wasn't going to win MVP, but I mean, he was a dog, and that's been the theme of the entire postseason. In that Atlanta series, when Giannis went down with the hyper extended knee, we saw it there too. Chris Middleton is a bad dude, and he was absolutely phenomenal this series.
I think people forget too how the Bucks started the playoffs. They started on a game-winning shot by Chris Middleton in game 1 against the Miami Heat. That is how their playoff run started. So if you didn't know how clutch he was, you should have.
Overtime, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was an overtime. You were missing the whole playoffs thing. I did want to talk about Chris because in that game 6, for most of the game, he was not as efficient as he is. But once it became that final 2-minute game, the clutch shots just started pouring in. And it was just like, it's almost automatic with the guy, especially this playoff run. But I do want to talk about when we talked about game 4 with him having 40, and Booker had 42 that game. And then you go to game 5 and Booker had 40 again. But then with game 5, you have then arguably one of the best alley-oops in finals history with another dog on the team, Drew Holiday, who I don't feel like he's gotten the proper respect that he deserves for the defense that he played on Chris Paul and Devin Booker, and the steal to the alley-oop to Giannis to the and one. I mean, we saw 2 iconic plays in back-to-back games. So what did you think about Drew in the series?
Drew early on really struggled offensively. And he had some games in there where it helped offset those 2 rougher games to start. 16.7 points per game, 9.3 assists, 6.2 rebounds per game. I mean, again, you go from Eric Bledsoe to Drew Holiday. Already, I mean, that's an offensive improvement, especially on the distribution side. I mean, that was for everything that was Giannis being successful in attacking the basket off ball. It was Drew finding him and finding creative ways to get it to him, where he could just either kind of do the one dribble bully ball I'm going to attack the rim, gets the line, or I'm going to just feed him in transition with, a pass that only he's going to get. That lob, I mean, Giannis was calling for it. He even said in the press conference, again, I was calling for it. Like, you got to trust me. And I'm thankful. I mean, that was a risky thing. If it's not on the right spot, that could really, really hurt. So, I mean, that was great. But by and large, Drew Holiday's, you hit it home. Drew Holiday's impression on the series was what he was able to do defensively. I mean, he made the times he was on Booker and Booker got his this series. I mean, that young man, absolutely put out. We knew he was going to just put on a show. And then what he was able to do with a potentially hobbled Chris Paul. I still haven't seen anything publicly that says, hell yeah, he was dealing with a fractured hand or whatever. There's been a lot of speculation that Chris Paul has been injured, and we could tell like he wasn't himself heading into Game 6. He had a better Game 6, but again, everything was difficult because of Drew Holiday. And we're going to transition a little bit to talk about Team USA basketball. And this is a guy that sorely this team needs in the worst way when it comes to distribution and playmaking, and picking up the other team's guards coming up the court is Drew Holiday.
So, Evan, when we go back to Game 6, and you already rattled off Giannis's stat line, because and I don't want to say like the Jordan Ness thing as well, but he was playing as like, we are not going to Game 7. Like, we are ending this right here, and I'm going to do literally whatever it takes to get this done. And I know it's been tossed around, but in all honesty, in our lifetime, like our adult lifetime, is this the greatest finals closeout game ever?
It's a tough one for me. I think it's definitely up there. That Game 7 LeBron game from 2000, was it 12 or 13 maybe? I think it was Game 7. I think the Mike Miller game.
That would have been third against the Spurs.
Yeah.
That's 13, because that's when he had the block on Birdman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, 13.
So, I mean, like that closeout game, I think was up there. But, I mean, just in terms of, if you're not, I mean, we're on J.R. Smith game, most dominant game up until this point I'd seen of anybody in the finals. You're right, in our adult lifetime span, 10 years or so here. This one surpasses it, just knowing what's on the line. And obviously, if the Cavs get the win there, that's just another notch on LeBron's belt. And obviously he deserves that with that. I mean, he just was so dominant, knowing what was stacked against him with the Durant Warriors and everything else. That one goes at number 2 for me. And this Giannis game is number 1, especially in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. And I guess too, with them and them winning and him obviously getting finals MVP. And I know we talked about it when we were previewing the finals, and now only the third dude in history to have an MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, and now finals MVP behind MJ and the Dream Hakeem. And now he's a 2-time MVP, an All-Star Game MVP, take that for what it's worth, Defensive Player of the Year, Most Improved, a champion, and a finals MVP. And obviously the first teams and the first team defenses, it's like he retires right now. He's a first ballot Hall of Famer, and he's only 26. Yep. So it's like, and I know I've heard on podcasts stuff about people taking him for granted and all the things he's accomplished, but with the title now at 26, what does that say about Giannis's resume to you?
The most impressive statistic of all that is the age, man. He's 26. It's going to be exciting to see where things go in the next 10 years for him. The challenge is on Milwaukee again to how do we continue to get better, knowing that the Nets are coming back next year.
Yep.
And you have to start each season, obviously, with who's on paper, who's got what in terms of tools and resources. And, that Nets team, if they're fully healthy, is going to walk most of the way. But again, that's a big if with they're healthy, and is Kyrie into the fold and everything else. So I mean, Milwaukee's got a tough challenge. They pulled it together this year. It was throwing the house draft pick wise to get Drew Holiday was vitally important to how this all unfolded. They don't win this title without that. One last guy I want to say that real quick on the last thing on the Milwaukee side of things was Pat Connaughton. They don't win this series without Pat Connaughton. I know Portis had a few flashes here and there, but I mean, it was kind of more of a, hey, right. It was kind of more help sustain the momentum at home when he had his flashes. But Pat Connaughton came in and he knocked down clutch threes when they needed it, man. Came in, defended well, rebounded well. I mean, all the kind of stat stuffing things you need from a gritty role player, Pat Connaughton did. And it's going to be on Milwaukee to sustain Giannis's championship window and continue to try to see what all they can do to support him by continuing to find the Pat Connaughtons in the draft and finding really, especially at the end of the draft when you don't have a lot of first round picks and stuff like that, your second rounds, finding those valuable assets to come in that you can help reduce the workload on Giannis and everybody else during the regular season, and then transition that into being role players. I mean, we know that, I mean, they did not have a lot of depth when it came to the end of this. DiVincenzo was injured. Bryn Forbes, who was on fire in that Heat series, couldn't play him at the end. Brooke Lopez, was getting played off the floor when the Suns went small. I mean, they kind of won this finals with like 5.5 guys, potentially 6. It's going to be on them. The age thing, back to your original point with Giannis, that's the most important thing I think that stands out is the accolades are already there. The guy could be done tomorrow, or heaven forbid, have a horrendous injury and have to call it quits. But I mean, there's just so much more room to go. And anytime you're mentioned along the lines with some of those greats, and you think about how many great players like, Chris Paul and Charles Barkley and everything else, that like we automatically put you ahead if you've got that title. He's got that title now. And I love that in all the post-game stuff and everything else. And again, they benefited a lot from having to play teams, that were injured and stuff this year, but they won. They could only win the games that were in front of them. It was important to him to do it for the franchise that drafted him. He said, I could go to a super team. I could do this, but we did it our way. We did it the right way. We did it through drafting and through trades. I mean, Chris Middleton, again, 2nd round pick, again, and being smart and acquiring the assets to go out there and get Drew, who was unhappy in his situation in New Orleans. Again, it's just an impressive run by the Milwaukee Bucks come full circle. And now we're in the off season.
What do you think with them winning? Me personally, I think it's great for the league for a small market team to win. Cause obviously the last small market team was Cleveland when we won that, when we came back from 3-1. So it's like, does that still show the league that, hey, you could still, like, you get the superstar, you build around them, even though we've talked about the injuries and all that, but you could still win a championship that way. You don't have to do the whole summer of recruiting. So I do think that's a great thing for like the NBA and the general.
Yeah, for the league, that's a win-win because you can say, hey, like, look, it's possible. And no, we don't do everything to make it advantageous only for the larger franchises and stuff. But it almost gives them a crutch for that. I still feel like there's much more they can do to support small markets, whether it's through CBA stuff and even television rights, man. I mean, when it comes to helping teams get local, ad revenue and some of those stuff with negotiating. I mean, like just here in Ohio, how many markets have like pulled out, or how many television markets have pulled out the ability to be able to watch the awful Cleveland Cavaliers, my beloved team, from YouTube TV, from Sling. They've just like yanked them all off. And I mean, there's no way to watch this team. Like that's like and you're not going to see it on the national stage too, because the league doesn't push that in their negotiations with the ESPN and TNT. Like it's always the big names that are winning. I mean, there's none of that, but there's a lot of parity in the league. It is possible. I love that Giannis had this mentality. Dude, just such a unicorn. It's just impressive all the way around. I think there's viability for small markets to compete. They have to pay more for things. I mean, they had to pay more for Drew Holiday to get him to come because Drew Holiday might not have signed there. So small markets are always going to have to overpay to get quality assets. And I hate when teams look at say, well, like, again, we're Cavs got the bad Kevin Love deal right now, still sitting on the thing, but in order to get a Kevin Love at the time, we had to overpay for him because they just don't walk into places like Cleveland and walk into places like Indiana or Memphis. You've got to overpay for role players and compete with your pocketbooks, and sometimes that constricts you on some other ways. But Milwaukee found the right balance and struck gold in a couple of different transactions, and they were able to ride that to an NBA championship.
What about the losers? Now, I mean, with the Phoenix Suns, I mean, they were our Phoenix Suns because, I mean, we've been high on them since the preseason, and they did us very proud making it to the finals and going and losing in 6. And I think with this team, obviously Devin Booker showed now the entire world, if you haven't watched him play. DeAndre Ayton can play. I just feel like those last couple games, they were just not his best moments. And obviously Chris Paul, who was the difference of bringing this team from the gutter to the finals. I mean, they gotta re-sign Chris Paul, don't they?
Yeah. So it's interesting. I was just listening to a podcast before I hopped on. Never say never, highly unlikely. Ryan Russillo was reporting on his podcast that just was recorded and dropped today on July 26th that he's hearing that no one from the Suns has touched base with Chris Paul yet in terms of contract extension. Martin, put me down. You me. I don't know if you know well this side of me. You and I, like, our friendship doesn't touch on like this interest, but a lot of people, like a lot of other friends in different friend groups that I have, like, know that I love researching a good conspiracy. You and I don't really talk about that a whole lot, but I mean, like, you give me like, okay, where's the missing tapes on the JFK film, or did we really get to the moon? Like if I'm doing along, like I don't believe in them necessarily. I just find them fascinating that, the depths of things of like, there's a gray area there, or there could be a gray area there. Mark me down officially. First order of our offseason of putting Evan down as a Chris Paul to the Lakers conspiracy theorist. I ain't saying it's going to happen, but you've got Chris Paul, who's up there in age. And now granted, he would have to, I think the only way that happens is, and I'd have to look at the contract again, but would be he'd have to opt out of his player option of like $50 million a year almost, and take a stupid amount less to go to the Lakers. Lakers would have to find a home for not re-sign Dennis Schroeder, which it sounds like they're kind of trying not to do anyway. They need to send Trez somewhere, basically, try to see if maybe they can ship away yet another first round pick way down the road or something to be able to do that. They do have their own first, I think this year they have the 22nd, 24th pick. They could attach that with Trez to somewhere just for a salary dump thing. I mean, you never say never. It's possible. People always, signing trades can happen. Phoenix would want to help Chris Paul out in doing that. But get the two buddies together. They've always wanted to play with each other. And if Phoenix hasn't reached out, knowing that he can opt out of the last year of his deal, essentially with the player option, like,
yeah, they got to sign. They got to sign.
For Phoenix side of things, you've got to call right now. What are you doing? Yeah. They have to address offseason. They have to address their size issue. They have to decide what they're going to do with Campaign, who is so vital to this run. He's going to get a minimum $10 million a year. I don't know that he is going to get that from Phoenix, but they have to continue to draft well, which James Jones has really, really done, and that front office has done. But if you're Sarver as the owner of the Suns, you can't afford to lose Chris Paul. But I think their biggest offseason needs are addressing their front court depth. You can't have Frank Kaminsky being your only backup, and I don't know why Jalen Smith, your first round pick from last year, the rookie out of Maryland, was like just unplayable. Like you couldn't even find 2 minutes for him. Like the Cavs were playing Timothy Mozgov a couple years ago in the finals. Like, I mean, at a certain point, you just got to throw somebody in there to rack up fouls on somebody. When you've got a big like that. So they've got to address that. Another year with Booker and Chris Paul, they'll get some of those things figured out. But I mean, look how many injuries were out there in the West too. I mean, there's no guarantees that they'll be able to get back here, even if they address some of those things. And they benefited a lot health-wise too. That, how many years has Chris gone down with some kind of injury? And then looking at, Denver going down with injury and everything else. I mean, it's one of those things where, they're going to have to fight once again to get back to this. I mean, it's not going to be a guarantee that they're automatically a top 2 or top 3 team heading in the next year.
So with the regular season, with the season over now, with championship, I would deem this a successful season. Obviously, like the first full season during the COVID era. How would you rate the season? Do you feel like it was a success for the NBA? Like, what do you think now that this has come to a close and we're going into the off season?
I think going into the finals, a lot of people said, hey, like this is going to be a dud because of all the injuries and stuff. We were at kind of like a 7, knowing that we've got through all the COVID stuff, everything else. I think the way Giannis shined in this finals took it to an 8. And the only reason why I don't give it any higher, I can't give it a 9 or a 10, is because of all the injuries this year. It was because that, hey, we had the Lakers were dropped. I mean, AD couldn't stay on the court. And I mean, it just was bad that you didn't have Jamal Murray. You didn't have the fully healthy Brooklyn Nets. You missed out on a lot of great playoff action and, a lot of solid excuses for teams. I mean, legitimately were plagued by injuries with the quick turnaround. So I think that's the only reason why I don't give it a 9 or 10, but I mean, 8 is still a fantastic year. And I really, really enjoyed this finals as a unbiased, just fan of basketball. Again, just with it not being my favorite team, that I just really enjoyed the storylines. I enjoyed the matchups, how Monty Williams and Bud made adjustments, throughout the series and how things ended. So fantastic year.
Now you said enjoy. Are you enjoying Olympic basketball right now? Because that is what we are in, and the women are doing fine. And also just a shout out to the Olympics for adding GOAT basketball 3-on-3 as an Olympic sport. That has been fantastic. I don't know if you've got a chance to watch any of the women's 3-on-3 games, but I just love seeing 3-on-3 basketball as an Olympic sport. But
I'd love to see it if we took it a little bit more seriously.
That's true.
Like we got more capable players playing in the Drew League right now than we do in 3-on-3 Olympic basketball. Like I think the idea, I don't know if I like the idea, Martin. Like I like the idea of any kind of competitive basketball at that level, but like when you don't have any big names or anything like that, it's just, I don't know. I struggle with it. But it could be there if you had the names behind it, and we just don't. Like it's kind of your all-star game issue, in my opinion. All-star game could be great until we had these issues with the all-star game, so we had to do the extended, hey, here's the magic number rule and stuff, and we do the, hey, you just have the top vote getters draft their own teams. Like we had to shake it up that much to get interested. Like maybe give it next cycle Olympics, we can start to get some folks in there to change that. But yeah, USA men's obviously struggling a bit right now. I've heard everything from teams are struggling with the Spurs style offense, which just struggles. Like I struggle with that because how many championships has it won and everything else? Like just buy into the team dynamic to, there are probably some seeds there. They're not doing enough simplification. They're not doing enough pick and roll. And they sincerely are not doing a lot of pick and roll. I mean, we've got so much talent on that team. It's ISO basketball where you need a guy like Drew Holiday to come in, who just finished the finals, to come in and get you settled into sets and systems and plays. You need as much as that. And they don't have any other play. In my opinion, they don't have any other player to set you into offense other than Drew Holiday right now. it's just a lot of ISO one-on-one things, and all these guys from all these countries, from Spain to, I mean, you name it, have just been absolutely. I mean, and we saw with USA's first kind of placement match loss yesterday to France that, hey, all these teams that have played together, Gobert and along with Evan Fournier and to Spain, where you've got 42-year-old Pau Gasol out there with Marc Gasol, the Hernan Gomez brothers. I mean, these guys all got continuity, and they gel, and they care about this. They care about this in a lot of ways, a lot more than us, even though we've got the talent. So somewhere in between getting Drew some more practice time in to run systems and sets, and targeting some more pick and roll. I'm not as negative on USA coming back and ended up like winning the gold. I mean, they haven't even had the elimination games yet, because we're just still doing the seeding in our different groups, kind of type games and stuff right now. But I'm not as like doom and gloom about it yet, because we did see a couple good showings from them outside of the scrimmages after that first loss to is it Nigeria?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Nigeria, coached by a fantastic Mike Brown team and a lot of up and coming recent draftees in the NBA. They bounced back from that a little bit in some of those last scrimmages, but I mean, it's not going to be a cakewalk. Nigeria, Australia, France. We saw Luka go for 40 plus last night. I mean,
48.
Oh yeah, I mean, like it's just. It's a different style of basketball. You're not going to get all the tic-tac fouls. And I think that's been a huge adjustment for these guys. They're not used to that under the basket. They're not getting the some of the continuation stuff. You've got lesser quarters now in terms of playing time. To catch up, play runs, making adjustments, all those types of things. But again, they've got the most talent in the world. It's just a matter of how do we translate that into off-ball movement, into down screens, into running sets, and putting as much emphasis of what we're doing away from the ball as we are dribbling with the ball.
Yeah, so when I watched the game yesterday, and when France went on that 16-2 run to end the game, and there were chances where we got offensive rebounds, and we had 4 wide open threes. Like KD had some, Dame had some, Drew had some, and they just weren't going. And I mean, with like historical standpoint, this was like our first real Olympic loss since 2004 against Argentina, where we got the bronze in that. And then we had the Redeem team in 2008 and things of that nature. So I was a little, I wouldn't say I was mad. I was upset about it because I'm just like, obviously in those games against Nigeria, we weren't really playing our best, but then seeing it in a real game, and it's only group play, and the other 2 games should be cakewalks, but it's just like this won't be easy. And I know Luka was quoted, I think about a year ago, saying how it's easier to score in the NBA than it is in Europe. To your point when you talked about like they're not getting the same foul calls, and Dame Lillard said that like a lot of these players like are completely different when they play for their countries. Just as another point, as you said, like they care about this a lot more. Like, and now if we don't win the gold medal and we lose, then since, I mean, Americans don't really like losing like that, then there's going to be like, all right, we need to get back to like just dominating again. And I think this is the first Olympic team in our lives that there's no leadership from a Michael, a Kobe, or a LeBron. So like Kevin Durant's the best player on this team, and he's quote as the best player, I guess, the leader. So I know people were tearing into him during that he should be able to lead this team to a gold. And then I know when people were talking about Popovich, which I agree with you that the dude has 5 championships. But when they were going over his record in 2019 in the pre-FIBA exhibitions, he was 3-1. 2019 in the FIBA World Cup, he was 6-2. The 2021 pre-Olympic exhibitions, 2-2, and currently in the Olympics, 0-1. And then that 2019 FIBA World Cup, we had a 7th place finish. That was America's worst ever finish in a major basketball tournament. But Those numbers don't lie, but I really don't think it's his problem. I honestly think it's just what you said, that we're relying too much on talent and ISO basketball and with Drew there. And I would ask you this. You don't think Dame can set up the offense and run the offense? I mean, he is a point guard.
He is. He's capable. I mean, when we've won in our exhibitions, it's been because he's kind of taken a little bit more of that mentality. But for whatever reason, he's struggling right now on that side of things, which is really peculiar to me. I don't know if that's a systems thing or what. I want to kind of caveat a little bit into another conversation. Two more conversations really along the playmaking side of things were the roster selection. So that's been one that's come up a lot. All these players are obviously very qualified, and we're splitting hairs. But when you're looking at, there's only so many cooks you can have in the kitchen. Like, I think that's where your Keldon Johnsons have really excelled, where he's been promoted from the select team on, and had a phenomenal last exhibition game for us against Spain. Was, hey, he knows he's coming in. He knows he's going to be a role player. He knows he's going to be in the dunker spot, catching drop-offs and hitting the corner three and everything else. That, like, how do you feel about the selection side of things? That, maybe was it too heavy and just going out trying to find a bunch of alphas? And we are missing still a lot of alphas. There's no Kyrie Irving. There's no James Harden. There's no LeBron James, who arguably chose promoting Space Jam 2 over playing for the Olympics.
Yes.
Just call it what it is. I mean, like, seriously, like that kind of makes me mad here when I'm looking at him. Just like, that's the emphasis is promoting, like, there's promoting Space Jam. And don't get me wrong, like, who wants the extra minutes on LeBron and all those types of things? Like, if you're to get an injury or what have you, but you want to talk about guys we're missing that could set up an offense. It's as much, we're missing a lot of those role player guys. We're missing a legit couple point guards outside of like a Drew Holiday. And again,
biggest one that's been talked about is Trae Young.
Yeah. And I mean, he was even tweeting at the Olympics, trying to get them to come in. And John Morant tweeted, like, you didn't want me, like, don't come ask for me now, kind of thing. And also, I mean, look at the centers. They brought in Kevin Love, failed experiment, and he bowed out and said, no, my high ankle sprain that I basically didn't play at all last year in Cleveland for was an issue. Too much of an issue for me to go over and play and be viable. But I mean, also look how many bigs aren't, like, we're going to be hurting size wise potential. I mean, we did all right in the exhibition against Spain, but not to have like a Jared Allen or someone on there, and eventually they threw JaVale in at the end. I mean, JaVale can hold his own against some of these smaller teams and be effective catching lobs and rim running and pick and rolls. But I mean, that could be also some of the separation issues on playmakings of, hey, who's going to be setting screens for who? When you don't have a big to kind of completely eat up a smaller point guard for a Nigeria or, what have you. So I think roster selection plays in addition to the idea that we just been off a little bit and not running a system thing and just doing a lot of ISO stuff.
Who's in charge? Is because Pelangelo's done, right? It's who's in charge.
Allegedly, Grant Hill's running the show, but as somebody else put on a podcast today I listened to, Jerry Colangelo's fingerprints are all over this. Like, if you wanted to book Jerry Colangelo for a crime on roster construction, his fingerprints are all over this one. Because again, Grant Hill allegedly is running the show, but I ain't buying it.
For the listeners too, we have the Czech Republic and Iran in our Group A, along with France. So we'll be playing those two, and those should be annihilations.
I feel bad for Iran.
Yeah, they're going to get
12:40 a.m. tip. You going to stay up? Wednesday morning.
I'll actually probably wake up in between. I mean, when I'm asleep, I will, because I mean, I made sure I was back from the gym early on Sunday to make sure I watched the game. So, I mean, if it's within that range, I can wake up. Or
at 12:40 a.m.
I'll do it. I'll wake up. I'll do it. I'll watch a little bit and then go to sleep and then catch the recap the second half of the game. I mean, I need to at least see them up by 30 before I go to sleep. So just saying with that. And while they're over here playing, Evan, we actually do have some NBA stuff here in the States. We got the draft. Like, I feel like it shot up super quick. And it is this Thursday on ESPN. And obviously, we know the Detroit Pistons have the number 1 pick. And I'm just going to ask you, who do you want the Cavaliers to get? Have you made up your mind yet?
Before we get there, I do have, right as we started this pod, a little bit of Woj breaking news that's interesting. It's not too far down the list, but you're talking about number 1. You're talking about Cade Cunningham's only going to work out for number 1.
Yep.
Woj tweets about 40 minutes ago the following: Detroit's internal meetings are still revolving around 3 players for the number 1 pick on Thursday night. Cade Cunningham, Jalen Green, and Evan Mobley, sources tell ESPN. Detroit isn't fully there yet on committing to Cunningham with their first overall choice.
Do you believe that?
Martin, what's the point of the tweet even if it's a due diligence conversation for Detroit? Woj doesn't make this stuff up unless it's like LeBron and he's guessing, because he can't break LeBron's camp for any information whatsoever. And Clutch hates him, like with a passion. Like Clutch absolutely hates Adrian Wojnarowski with a fiery, burning passion. So they'll get nothing from any of their players and stuff over time. But what's the point of that tweet if that's not the case? That they're not genuinely considering some other things.
I honestly think from a media viewing standpoint, to create buzz. That's all I could think of right now. Like, all right, if they're not going to pick them, now we all got to tune in. It's like, so who really are they going to pick for the number 1 pick? That's the only logical thing. It's like the NBA saying, hey, create a little buzz saying you're not sold on them. But, I mean, you really are sold on him. There's no way they're not picking him. No way. Unless they trade the number 1 pick to someone, there's no way they're not picking him.
The other, I've been diving into, you name it, podcast stuff. I've been listening to, shout out to, unfortunately, a great NBA draft analyst that we used to watch all the time growing up, who was let go by ESPN. The Mel Kiper of NBA doesn't work at ESPN anymore. It's Chad Ford. Chad Ford's doing his own podcast stuff now on the Lockdown Network and has his own kind of self-publishing thing right now, but he's still interviewing high-level guests and everything else. The NBA's gone to Jay Billis for Jay Billis's top 10 available, all that stuff. And like, Jay Billis knows a lot about college basketball, but I just love Chad Ford's analysis more. He's had a lot of different folks on talking about, again, just how much closer things are between Cade Cunningham and Evan Mobley than they are everybody else. I went into all this thinking, like, what the heck? Like, are you not watching the same Jalen Green I'm watching? Because this guy's an athletic freak. I mean, he's Russell Westbrook athleticism type with a better jump shot now. He's arguably better than Anthony Edwards. He's more athletic than Anthony Edwards for sure. He was the number 1 pick a year ago. Back to your question about the Cavs and what Detroit does and if there's any substance to this tweet. I don't think right now, given all the information we know, we don't have the workout tapes. We don't know how they interview. We don't know them as human beings. I think these 3 are clearly the top tier of draft prospects. And I don't think any team can go wrong with picking them. I mean, obviously, by the time it gets to the Cavs, it's like Pokemon starting out, man. Like, somebody's going to pick a Bulbasaur, somebody's going to pick a Squirtle, and like, you're left with whatever you're left with, and it's going to be good. But like, it's no different there. I mean, I'll be thankful if I can have, as for the Cavs, any of those 3, we'll get it figured out. You've got to take the best prospect available. There's been a lot of buzz about, and as teams do, about fit and who fits where and what have you. But this is just such an interesting wrinkle that people are changing on the Cade side of things now. Like, I'd love, like, for the Cavs, like, I'd love to have Cade. I think he could work with I'd love to play him a small forward in kind of a LeBron distribution role at 6'8". Kind of somewhat like if Philadelphia with Ben Simmons actually had guards, what you could do with him and have him work as much kind of off ball stuff. But I mean, I'd love to have any of these three players, but it's interesting that comment in that tweet isn't fully there yet. I mean, Martin, it's July 26th. Mm-hmm. July 29th is the draft. Mm-hmm. We've had how many months of build up and interviews and everything else? I think Jalen Green just went and worked out for Detroit in the last 48 hours. I saw on Twitter. It's just fascinating to me.
No, I agree, because like you break it down, because I didn't know Woj tweeted that recently, and it'll be something too where I do like your analogy, because I mean Cleveland does have the third pick, and describing it as just three starters of Pokemon, because you're right, because one's gonna get the other, and you might not have gotten the one you want, but you're still going to get a very good starting player for your team, especially up here in the lottery. But yeah, I do think it's weird that it's coming out now, especially with all the basketball buzz talking about how terrible, quote unquote, USA men's basketball is right now. And then you're just dropping this in. And now we're like, wait, what do you mean Kate Cunningham might not go number one? And now you're looking like we haven't seen any of the workout stuff, but it adds more intrigue to the draft. I'll tell you that much.
I think in terms of draft order, I think the world, unless something changes, unless somebody comes up and offers a king's ransom, and let's not rule out that that's not a possibility, that somebody could come up and offer a king's ransom. I think it's highly unlikely with these three at the top of the draft that happens compared to other years. But I mean, at a certain point, you got to look at it, to use another pop culture analogy, as a money in the bank situation for the teams that have assets. Look at New Orleans and the number of picks they've gotten for Anthony Davis, Andrew Holiday. And obviously the king of kings when it comes to draft picks, the Oklahoma City Thunder, can say, hey, here's the house for Cade Cunningham to pair with Shai Gilgeous and Poku and you name it. It's possible. I mean, those folks can come out of the woodworks last second. They can play it close to the vest and then come up and say, you know what, we want. Like, if I'm Oklahoma City, I mean, again, it's just you got to put on the hat of the franchise you're on. If I'm Oklahoma City, I'm giving my godfather offer to whoever's in a position to draft Evan Mobley. And I want Evan Mobley and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in terms of, you want to talk about fit, you want to talk about, a lot of people have talked with Mobley. His floor is the highest floor of any of these three, because there's a lot of, but I mean, his ceiling might not be as high as a Cunningham on in terms of distribution versus what Mobley brings to the game, or potentially what Green could be. Green could potentially be a 25 to 30 point scorer. Again, there's a lot of things that are going to be worked out in the next 72 hours, but that's the first Woj bomb we've had this week on a Monday, man. It's interesting to me.
Well, I think with that, I think Mobley is going to Cleveland. So would you listen, if you're in the office, are you going to listen to Oklahoma City about what you just said about the picks?
I'd have to look in to see they've got so many freaking draft picks. I'm not entirely sure. The one thing for Cleveland, a couple of things going on. What makes sense from an organization's perspective doesn't make sense for a GM perspective for the Cavs right now, because Kobe Altman's playing for his job. Mm-hmm. And that's not a play for your job move, is to kick this down the road another year, say, hey, we're likely not going to compete. But I think there's something to be said. If there's a number of picks, I don't know what that looks like. And it obviously depends on teams and stuff for projection with what they got. But as you recall, I believe next year is the double draft. So where high school kids are eligible. And so you're going to have your college and G League crop that we always deal with. And then now you're going to have 18-year-olds straight out of high school for the first time in years. I mean, that's going to be a very worthwhile draft that, 10 years from now, we're going to be like, oh my gosh, like it's just amazing. But if I'm in the seat right now, I'm going to probably lean more towards the Kobe Altman thing and say, I need Evan Mobley. I will not move off of him. And that's not a stance I would have taken a couple weeks ago. I was much higher on Jalen Green. I mean, granted, like if Houston or somebody takes Evan Mobley head, I'm going to be really happy with Jalen Green. But I think with Evan Mobley, I like the fit much better, even though we've got Larry Nance and we've got for the time being Kevin Love until he gets bought out or whatever. And we've got Jared Allen and Dean Wade's shown some flashes as an undrafted rookie. I mean, we've got a whole bunch of power forwards and we've got a bunch of small guards. I think Evan Mobley could be that next unicorn freak man that just the way he covers ground, the way he has his touch. He doesn't have to be a back to the basket center that hasn't succeeded a whole lot. But in my eyes, if you're looking at between Mobley and Green, you're hopeful that Green in 3 years, as much Colin Sexton trade talk's been out there, you're hopeful that Green in 3 years is Colin Sexton scoring 24 points a game. We've got a Colin Sexton right now. We don't need a guy who could become Colin Sexton in 3 years and maybe be a little bit better of a playmaker and have a little bit more size defensively. So with that being said, I mean, the fit thing, hey, we need to keep working in this rebuild back towards being relevant again in the league. I'm all in on Evan Mobley today.
And then with the draft too, and there's obviously going to be some surprises in the draft, but then we'll have the offseason, and you're already hearing the talks. I know you brought up the thing with like maybe CP3 to the Lakers. The Laker fans are there talking about trying to get Dame. And now there's the other thing of them trying to get Westbrook. Obviously with Kawhi, we'll see, like he's coming off an ACL, if he's going to just re-sign with them or if someone's going to make a push for him, or with maybe trading some of these picks for players that might happen on Thursday. Like, what are you expecting to see at the start of the offseason? And obviously one of the pastimes is seeing people get ridiculous contracts. Like, what are you thinking you're going to see once that thing hits Monday or whenever the offseason starts?
Yeah, Monday at 6 p.m. Eastern time.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to see craziness. And, for a lot of these players that hang in the balance, like the Ben Simmons trade we're waiting on, that all but seems like it's going to happen. All these things depend on teams. Again, like you want young assets, you want draft capital. Even if you don't want it, another team wants it. So if you're trying to work out a 3 trade, or maybe you don't have picks, you need to get picks from somebody else to put towards to get a Ben Simmons or a Dame Lillard or something like that. You want to be able to either be in that spot or give somebody the spot to be able to make the picks themselves. So in theory, we could have absolute craziness in the next 72 hours on, Ben Simmons finding a home, or, again, something happened with Dame Lillard. But, to the free agency option again, we've got Kawhi Leonard who basically can't play all next year, who's got a player option he could decline. Chris Paul has a player option he could decline. Arguably the most coveted free agent right now in terms of for sure's that we know about is Kyle Lowry. There's been a lot of linkage to him to the Pelicans. A lot of linkage to him going home and playing for the 76ers. I think that's high on the priority list, depending on what they would get back if they do move on from Ben Simmons from the point guard side of things. I've even heard, I don't know how the money would work, but I've even heard of reuniting the Toronto guards in LA with DeMar DeRozan and Kyle Lowry. DeMar's a LA kid. I mean, that side makes sense. Obviously, Kyle and DeMar were devastated when they got traded up. You got Mike Conley, who's an unrestricted free agent. John Collins has been matched already. I think New Orleans might end up letting Lonzo Ball walk. I don't think they're willing to pay him what some teams are going to come out of the woodworks to pay him. And I've seen a little bit of Lonzo Ball jump shot improvement just with some offseason workouts. Dude, I'm okay. You're rolling your eyes at me now, but watch out for Lonzo Ball next year.
I don't hold those offseason things for anything, because Ben Simmons was hitting Steph Curry shots this summer and it did not pan out the same.
I think Duncan Robinson's going to get paid a whole bunch too. Norman Powell, great combo guard. I mean, you want to talk about a team, if there's a way to do some movement around to add a Norman Powell to like a defending champ Milwaukee Bucks or something like that, I think that's amazing. I think the Cows are going to have to pay up to keep Jared Allen. Toronto and some of these other teams have been hard after the idea of a center like him. I just think we're going to see absolute chaos between now and then. I think you're going to see it now as opposed to later because teams want to be able to pick the players they want to pick with those high picks. Again, like what the Cavs are looking at with Evan Mobley is completely different, allegedly, than what the Houston Rockets are looking at with Jalen Green. And that can be all the difference between, hey, we're not interested anymore, or we are interested because we have we're in the driver's seat to be able to make that pick ourselves. As you recall with the Andrew Wiggins trade for Kevin Love back in 2014, there's that weird, remember Andrew Wiggins played for us all through summer league, and just based on the CBA, like there was like 30 days that had to eclipse between when he was drafted to when we could trade him. And everybody, like LeBron wrote the letter and didn't say he's coming back and like didn't reference Andrew Wiggins at all in the thing. He's excited to work with him because it's a done deal that they were trading him basically. So, I mean, you don't want that weird stuff for these young kids trying to make the jump. You don't need any of that. Like we're going to see it in the next 48 hours, Martin.
Evan, any other basketball things you want to hit on? This has been a very detailed NBA pod. Anything else that we missed?
Give me one draft sleeper. We've talked about the big three. A lot of people presume that Jalen Suggs is going to Toronto at 4. And then after that, I think it's kind of a crapshoot. Who is your next? If you've got the 5th pick, let's assume that those are the first 4 off the board. If you're the 5th pick with, I think that's the Orlando Magic, and you're looking for, I don't care what the rankings say. I don't care just based on maybe size, scheme, metrics, what have you. Of like, if you look back, let's frame it this way. If you look back in 5 years and say, holy crap, this guy who went 13 should have been number 3 or should have been number 5 or what have you. Who would be that sleeper?
I don't even know if he's a sleeper. I just feel like he's not getting the publicity he deserves, and that's Mr. Barnes. I don't consider him a sleeper. He's going to be in the top like 6, but it's like it's those 3 and then everyone else. But I think Scotty's going to be really good. I mean, if he goes 5th, it'd be to Orlando. If he goes 6th, it would be to Oklahoma City. But I feel like people are underestimating him from Florida State. He's not really a sleeper, but he's not really getting talked about. So he's like
I think he could go as high as 5. I think his at minimum his floor is higher than the risk of who's the G League kid? Jonathan Kuminga. I think Kuminga's upside as an all-star potential is way higher. Just again, because he can score a lot better than that. But I mean, the playmaking abilities really stood out with me with this young man from Florida State. And you take it back a year ago, and this is kind of your Patrick Williams pick, isn't it? Very similar concept. You're like, holy crap, we've got like a 6'10" dude over here who can handle the ball and defend and distribute a little bit. Like that's how Patrick Williams shot to number 4. I think he could go 5. I'm going to use a cop out and say that also will be my somewhat sleeper pick, but also the real one I'll put over top of him for the time being is James Bouknight.
Okay.
I think that dude's just a bucket getter. This league's about getting buckets. I think that this could be granted he had a down year this year, but a very Tyler Hero type pick where you're like, holy crap, a very, who's the kid with the Kings? Martin, help me out. Halliburton. Is it like this is your Tyrese Halliburton type guy where you're just like, yeah, we should have gotten him. And there could be plenty of teams back in the draft too that could trade up to get both those guys. I don't know that I see Golden State taking a stab at either of those guys, with their first pick, but who knows? That's another interesting wrinkle too. Martin, we could talk about this for another hour, man. I'm incredibly excited to see how things go. I mean, I love that basketball's a 12-month, 4-season sport. And this is evidence of it with starting with the Woj tweet. So.
Oh, I know. And we could go another hour, but we won't have to worry about that since we will be talking about the draft after the draft happens. So
Listeners, be sure to follow us on the Twitter. Follow Martin individually at MNA00. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then myself at Evan Debo PR at Evan Debo PR. We'll love to chat with you guys on Thursday evening, just going back and forth, listening to picks. Like and subscribe to the pod. Help us cook those books, as they say. Like, subscribe, unsubscribe, then resubscribe. So we've got good metrics. Got to pay the bills around here. Not really, but we do this for fun and for the love of the game. But we're excited, and hopefully we provide a little bit of context on a off-season primer here.
I really have nothing more to add to that closing. That closing was great. So with that being said, thank you everyone for listening to the L7C podcast. You guys take care. Thank you for listening to this episode of the L7C podcast. Be sure to like, rate, review, and subscribe to the channel. Follow us on all social media platforms, and we'll be talking to you guys soon. Take care.